Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're talking to Sara Olsher. She is the founder of Mighty and Bright, which provides visual schedules, picture books, and other tools to help overwhelmed parents prioritize mental health for their kids, learning together and incorporating coping skills into day-to-day life. Sara's goal is to help parents help their kids through hard seasons. Sara is a single mom and a cancer survivor and was chosen as a 2023 Remarkable Woman by Nexstar Media. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Let's start with your own story, Sara, and your own hard seasons, because they've been a few.
Yeah. I think, I was very lucky to have a pretty easy childhood, which prepared me for an adulthood that was less than ideal. But yeah, so I had my daughter, and a year and a half later ended up going through a really brutal divorce. And my daughter was having a ton of anxiety, and I did not know how to help her. My background was in psychology, but I had studied adults. And so I didn't know how to help her, and immediately thought to myself, I think I should probably, find a therapist. And so I talked to my ex-husband about it, and he was basically like, I don't know how a therapist could help a 2-year-old. But I found a trauma-informed therapist that was willing to take a toddler. And I learned so much about child development, and that ended up really serving me as I had to parent through this divorce. And then later, like 4 years later, I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I had to go through all of that as a single mom, and figuring out how to do that, really having that therapy experience when she was so young really taught me a lot of getting through that stuff, talking to her about it.
And what was it like, the decision to kind of share? Because I think there's an option maybe at 2 years old to try to just throw a happy face on top of everything and be like, da, 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 nothing's wrong here. Don't worry about it. What was the decision? Was it a decision? And what was it like to decide to share what was really going on? Be truthful with your daughter.
Yeah, it was all of that research into child development, to be honest, because I thought, because my daughter was, 2, she wasn't super verbal yet, that she really didn't understand what was going on. But once I started to understand kids, I realized that no matter what they're able to say, they can understand way more than we give them credit for. And so if we're not talking about this stuff, then they can sense things that are, different than they were before. They sense like changes in your energy and your mood. They know something is up. And then because of the way that they develop in their brains, the whole world revolves around them. And so they're starting to tell themselves, I did something wrong. That's why mom is upset. I don't know what it is, but I did something bad. And we're not allowed to talk about it, because otherwise mom would talk to me about it.
We've talked about this with other experts in terms of racism. And when we try to raise kids in a colorblind world and don't talk about race and how people are treated differently, when we don't talk about it, doesn't mean that they don't notice that. They're just going to make up a story in their own heads that, as you say, it's very self-centered usually.
Yes.
And it isn't that they don't notice. We are going to tell ourselves stories, right? So how do you, and then there's the divorce at first, and then the cancer at 6, which is, to go back to what Margaret was saying, another fork in the road, right? There were probably lots of people who said, like, why would you tell your kid? Why burden them with that? Just let them think everything's fine. What went into that process for you?
I knew at that point, she was 6. I knew from now all of this experience that I had that if you don't tell them, they don't think nothing is wrong. You are not protecting them. And you might think like, oh, I don't want to break their heart. There's a lot of people with cancer who are, especially if they have like a metastatic disease where it's terminal, they're like, I don't want to rob them of their childhood. I don't want to give them bad news. But really, you're just kind of robbing them of the opportunity to be a part of something that could build resilience for them And, when you look back at people who had a parent who went through something difficult and then they didn't talk to their kids about it, the kids grow up and they're angry about it. It's about
Mhm.
trust, building trust with your kids and teaching them the skills that they really need because none of us gets out of life unscathed, right? Like something is going to happen at some point. And when it happens in childhood, we as parents can sometimes feel really guilty about that. But I look at it as an opportunity because we are there to hold their hands, to help them learn how to cope through hard stuff. Like there was one woman I was talking to who said that her dad spent her entire childhood trying to protect her and like basically put her in this bubble where nothing bad ever happened. And then she went to college and 9/11 happened. And he
Mm.
was like, "Oh no, I tried so hard." And she was like, "And I had no skills. I had no idea how to cope with something devastating." And so there's so many reasons like we don't want our kids to be alone in this process, thinking that a subject is off limits and then laying their heads down to sleep and worrying that they did something wrong, that they can't talk to you about whatever's going on because they know. They just don't know what it is. And that opportunity to really teach them how to cope.
And it does take some bravery. I had an incident that occurred and we had a trauma therapist and talking about that sometimes when because you are the person generally to tell your children about something, that it feels like you are hurting your child, right? And that you have this very nice other option to not tell them at all.
Right.
And so it's quite understandable, I think, this instinct to be like, well, someone hit me with a bat, I'm not going to hit my kid with the same bat. But that's not really the right metaphor for it. It's like introducing your kids to the truth of the world, not telling them doesn't mean it didn't happen, and telling them doesn't mean that you're hurting them. And I think
Right.
that helped me really change my mind about it because I was having a terrifically difficult time, like even just verbalizing what had happened. And in fact, completely failed at it, couldn't get it out of my mouth, and then ended up, her friends ended up filling in some details that would have been much better coming from me. But I think that the instinct, you see that little innocent face looking at you and to be like, I'm about to crush your world. We feel very personally involved. And it definitely helped me to have a little bit of that perspective of like, you really are just the messenger. It's not, you're not actually wounding this kid by telling them the truth.
Yeah, there's a lot of cancer survivors who are like, I feel so guilty for what I'm doing to my family. And there was someone a health psychologist that I was talking to during my treatment, and she said, I really want you to get away from that. Cancer is doing this to all of you. You are not doing this to anyone, as if you would choose to be diagnosed with cancer, as if you would choose for any terrible thing to happen,
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I realized going into this was because of all of that research, because of what I went through with the divorce, I had developed a skill of being able to take something that was really complicated and really make it simple so that a child could understand it. And I didn't find any resources out there when I was diagnosed with cancer that made that conversation easier. And as time has gone on and I've met more and more families that are dealing with things like cancer, like a terminal or chronic illness, like their own death, these are conversations that are really hard for us to have with other adults, let alone figure out how to have them with kids. And so it's really become a passion of mine to figure out how to explain these things to kids and then provide that as a resource to parents. Because if there's no resource there to make it easier, it's a lot less likely that a parent is going to have that conversation for the reason you just said, like, how do we even get this out?
You talk about teaching resilience to kids as part of these conversations, right? You're going to walk them towards greater resilience through this. And it's funny because I think sometimes that's the easy exit for us. We say, well, kids are resilient. He won't remember, right? She'll bounce back. She'll do this. I say that about my own kids when they're dealing with hard stuff. Kids are resilient, I suppose, but sometimes we use that as a sort of maybe free
Yeah.
pass to get out of worrying about them.
And how many of us are in therapy trying to recover from our childhood?
Mm.
You know, I think we say that, and it's just because they're not able to really show how much things are upsetting them. Like, one of the things that was really eye-opening to me with that trauma informed therapist was, she said it's really good that, you know, because my daughter was not coping and I didn't know how to help her at home, right? So she was teaching me things. And one of the things she said was, a lot of kids are having trauma happen to them when they are pre-verbal, and parents think they're okay until they start having behavior issues when they're in elementary school. And the reality is that the problem was actually happening a lot earlier. It's just we didn't realize what was going on. So it sucks because like parenthood's hard enough, right? Without like the fear and the guilt of like, oh my God, my kid is going to be messed up because they're not actually that resilient. They are. It's just we have to build the resilience ourselves, and we have to learn alongside them. Like, how do we support them through this stuff? You know, we only have to be one step ahead of our kids. We don't
Mm.
have to know all the things. We just have to go one step ahead, and we can all handle that, right?
Right.
Because we understand our brains are fully developed. Yeah.
There's a part of that that really speaks to me. I want to drill down on it when we come back. We are talking to Sara Olsher, the founder of Mighty and Bright, and we'll be right back. I think that one of the things that gets in our way when we're trying to help kids deal with difficult things is the fact that we don't have answers, and that it's speaking about one specific incident and other things that have happened, like bad things happen to good people, terrible things happen for no reason, you know, like a loving healthy dad dies, like why would this thing happen? And I think that sometimes we're scared to have the conversation, to start the conversation, because we so quickly get into I don't knows, and that
Mhm.
feels like they're looking to us to say like, but why would my friend die when she's 8? Like, I got nothing, kid. Like, I don't know why anyone dies when they're 8. It doesn't make any sense to me. And so I do think that this idea of just being one step ahead, like, how do we deal in this treacherous land of I don't know, when it feels like our kids are looking at us to make things better?
Yeah, I think sometimes we are thinking of things in terms of like big existential questions.
Yes.
And one of the ways I would answer that question is because sometimes bodies get sick and they don't get better. And it doesn't it's like when a little animal is born and something is wrong with one of its body parts, and the body can only work for as long as all of the body parts are working. And so one of the things that I'm working on right now is a book about what happens when someone is going to die. And a
Mm,
lot of these questions that kids are asking, they're not super existential. You know, it's not a matter of like, well, we have to come up with like the origin of the universe and
right.
like the purpose of all things. Because, you know, if they ask that question, then we have to say, I don't know. But we actually do know a lot more than I think we give ourselves credit
Hmm.
for, because sometimes their questions can be answered with like science. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, the book that I was looking for that I ended up having to write was The Science of Cancer. Because the truth is, things are a lot less scary when we actually talk about the truth and what
Yeah.
we do know. And so my book was all about like the body is made up of cells. And sometimes and those cells are basically building blocks, and the body can build and build and build, never run out of these cells. But sometimes they make a broken one. And the only thing the
Mhm.
broken one knows how to do is make more broken ones.
Mm.
And when the body has too many broken cells, that's called cancer. And we want to get rid of it, because if there's too many broken cells, it makes it hard for the body parts to do their jobs. And when you are talking to kids about what is actually going on, instead of creating analogies or metaphors and trying to like, you know, sometimes we overcomplicate things in an attempt to make them simple. And the
Mm.
truth is, if you can make things that are going on as simple as possible without, and truthful, it takes the fear out of it.
Can you tell us a little bit about how this went for you with your 6-year-old? You're holding your own fear about this, your own
Yeah.
uncertainty. You're presenting it to her. How did that?
Yeah.
And you
Oh,
hadn't
it
done
was
all of this
horrible.
work yet. You were new to this work,
That's what we
right?
always say.
Yeah.
It's like, well, when we start explaining it, here's the thing. It stinks. It's
Yeah,
not that we ever
right.
get to this
So
is
it
great.
wasn't
No.
perfect. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that is one of the things that I would really like to tell anybody that has to have any hard conversation with their kids. It's you don't have to do it perfectly for the first time. Like you were saying, Margaret, it doesn't have to be done perfectly the first time. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to like have this conversation and have it be perfect. I had like 20 billion conversations with my daughter about this. It is not a one and done sort of thing. And so when I first found out what was going on, I wanted to make sure I had a little bit more information before I told her what was going on. And it turned out, I thought my cancer was really early stage. So I explained to her what the body was doing and how I had one or two of these little broken cells and how I was just going to have surgery to have them taken out. And her first question was, are you going to die?
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, how does a 6-year-old know this? And I said, you know what, honey, some people do die from cancer. It is a really big word that means a lot of things. And so I want to make sure that I'm having this conversation with you, and as an aside, to use the word cancer, because other people are going to use the word cancer. And if she hears it from other people, like, I want to be the one who is the source of this information. So I said, people are going to have a lot of strong reactions because of how big of a word this is. But I want you and I to know that I have like baby cancer, not big, scary cancer that some people die from. And I said, there's lots of different things that people can do to get rid of cancer. If you have lots of these little broken cells, sometimes you'll have a medicine where you have to lose all of your hair because it kills healthy cells too. But I don't have to have that. I'm just going to have the surgery, but I won't have breasts anymore. And then as time went on, and her reaction to that was, okay. And then she went in the other room and she said to my mom, Mommy told me. And my mom was like, what'd she tell you? And she was like, well, she has a thing. I don't remember what it's called, but she's going to be fine.
So important takeaways.
Yes. But then when I had surgery and I woke up, it turned out that it had spread to my lymph nodes. And so I did have to have chemo. But because I had that basic foundational information for her, which is now in a children's book called What Happens When Someone I Love Has Cancer, so kids can read it over and over and over again and really understand it and not be like, Mommy has a thing, I don't know what it is.
Right, I don't know what it's called.
But I had that foundation, so then I could go back to her and say, remember how we thought there were only 1 or 2 broken cells? Well, it turns out they packed up their bags. They were trying to move to another part of my body. So to make sure that we kill all of them, I do have to have that medicine. I am going to lose my hair, and that's going to be sad because we both really love my hair, but it's going to be okay. And here's what you can expect. Because that's the other thing is developmentally, kids want to know what's going on, but they also want to know how it's going to affect their life. So when it comes to divorce, like, okay, we know we're going through a divorce. What does that mean? Was it my fault? How are our lives going to change? But then to show them on like their own personal co-parenting calendar, like, these are the days I'm going to be with this parent. These are the days I'm going to be with this parent. These are the things that like really bring it home for kids so that they understand what is going on and how it affects them. So there's a calendar for, cancer also, because some of these fears that come up are like, life is chaotic now. Different people are picking me up from school. What if somebody forgets me? How are we going to spend time together when you're tired? Like, these sorts of things, we want to show our kids like actually using visuals so that they can understand how it affects them.
I think one of the things that you said that I just want to highlight, because I think it's part of what I've had trouble with when I've had difficult, I think you taking the time to kind of go over it for yourself, because the
Mm-hmm.
hard thing is that kids are going to ask the questions that you might not be ready to ask yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
this person is not doing well. Are they going to die? That's the first thing a kid is going to ask
Yeah.
you. Or, well, dad and I are having problems. Is it because he doesn't love you? Whatever it is,
Yeah.
like, they're going to come out with your worst fear and verbalize that back to you. And I think in reflecting on you talking about breaking this news, and the first question is, are you going to die? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of be ready for the questions that are, you can't be ready for all of them. But I think sometimes we try to skip that stage because we're not ready to ask ourselves those questions, like they're too
Yeah.
hard. And
I
a
would
kid is like a
also,
scary little mirror
they are,
sometimes.
well said. I would also like to say, though, it is okay for you to say, I don't actually know the answer to that right now. Let me do some
Right.
research and come back.
That's
We
good.
don't have to have all of the answers. And if they ask a question, be like, you know what, I'm not actually sure, but that's a really good question. And then you go Google, how the heck do I answer this horrible question my kid just asked?
Right.
And then you go back and you say, you know what, I've thought about it, and here's the answer to that question.
We're talking to Sara Olsher, founder of Mighty and Bright. When we come back, we're going to learn some concrete things we can do to help our kids gain more resiliency in difficult times. Sara, you listen to this podcast, you know that in the third segment, we like to get to solutions. So you have, and you offer that. That's what you did with your work, right? At what point did you decide to this is something I need to take wide and bring to other people?
I think, well, right after so when I went to that therapist when my daughter was 2, the therapist was going on vacation, and she pulled out this like piece of construction paper that she had made a calendar on using like Dora the Explorer stickers. And she was like, on this day, you usually see me, but we're not going to see each other this day. We're going to see each other on this day instead. And I said to the therapist, is this like really necessary? Like, I don't think she understands the concept of like today and tomorrow, let alone like realizing
Next
we're
week,
missing a week.
right.
And the therapist said, absolutely necessary. It really erodes trust between a therapist and a child if we take a break and nobody says anything. And the whole way home, it was spinning around in my head, and I was thinking, if it erodes trust to miss one weekly session, what the heck is going on in my kid's head that her dad and I are suddenly split apart? She's suddenly in daycare when I used to work from home. Like, everything has changed, and she has no like concept of what is happening and when. And so I went home and I made this really horrible looking calendar using electrical tape and like handmade magnets with little pictures on them of me, of her dad, and of a school. And when I tell you that it completely changed her anxiety level, I am not exaggerating. I cannot believe what a difference it made to just show this kid on a calendar, like, here's today. And then she would go and check the calendar like multiple times a day, because developmentally kids can't keep that information in their heads anyway. So even if we're telling them, they're probably asking 8,000 times, when is that play date? When is this happening? When is that happening? And it's because they can't keep that information in their minds. And so to see that transformation of this kid who was like, she would not leave my side, and it really helped. I thought, somebody has got to have made something like this. And so I started Googling it, and nobody was talking about how to actually help kids through divorce. It was all about the apps that the parents share and how the parents communicate with the schedule. And so I thought, this is a game changer. Like, we have got to talk about this. And so that was the first iteration of Mighty and Bright, was a co-parenting calendar for kids of divorce. And then as time went on, and then I was diagnosed with cancer, I thought, divorce is just like the tip of the iceberg as far as the suffering that families are going through. Like, there are so many things that kids have to adjust to, whether it is, in my case, a, cancer diagnosis, or foster care, military families that are moving all the time, and really just everyday things are can be really overwhelming for kids. Our lives are really busy, and every kid can benefit from knowing what in the heck is going on. And so I really, at that point, was like, okay, this has to be bigger than me. And so I started talking about it more. Then I wrote my first children's book, and that started to be used in hospitals. And then the hospital child life specialists were reaching out saying, this book is fantastic. We need one for kids with cancer. We need one for their siblings. And so it kind of took on a life of its own. And then the pandemic hit.
Mm.
And I was noticing all of these horrible statistics coming out, and they were declaring, a state of emergency for kids' mental health. And I felt totally overwhelmed. And I thought, there has to be some kind of like positive statistics. There has to be some research about how we can help prevent these horrible things from happening to our kids, because the pandemic was like, fuel to an already raging fire of kids' mental health issues. And it was really just stressful to read it every day. And so I started researching, as I like to do. And I found that they have already studied what the protective factors were for kids' mental health, like what we could actually do to help prevent these things. And they were things like having a strong parent-child relationship, having kids that know that they can come to you and talk to you when something bad is going on, emotional regulation, community support, structure. I'm like, oh, I'm all about the structure already. And so I made a list of all these things, and I found an early childhood specialist, and I said, hey, I think we should work on this project together, because it's not like either of us have anything else going on, right? And she's like, I'm totally into this because I feel really overwhelmed by this. And so she and I assembled a whole board of advisors, and we created about 10 different products that could help teach different skills. And then we went and did a deep dive on each one of these skills. Like, how do you actually teach problem solving to kids? Talking to school counselors who were just like, oh, I hate teaching kids how to problem solve. Those kids are coming to me complaining all the time. And I'm like, is this a big problem or is this a little problem? Like, this is a little problem. You need to let it go and move on. And it's like, well, that actually doesn't teach them anything. We as adults are frustrated because it's just constant complaining from our perspective. But to them, it is a big deal, or they wouldn't be coming to us with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we basically figured out, like, how do we create a solution for like in the moment problem? Jesse pulled my hair, Sally stole my toy, but then also, how do we teach kids how to solve bigger problems when they're super overwhelmed? And we created a whole workbook of like, okay, we're going to do a brain dump first. Then we're going to circle the things that are, really the things that are bad. We're going to underline the things that are easy to solve. We're going to organize our thoughts. And then by the end of it, we feel better and we have like a to-do list of how to solve our problem. It's things like that we were not taught when we were kids and had to figure out probably not very well through our 20s, and by trial and error. But there are things that can actually be taught. And imagine what it would be like if your kid left their, elementary school and could go into middle school knowing how to solve problems, knowing what their emotions are, where they are in their body, how to use coping skills, how the nervous system works, knowing that they can come to you when they are overwhelmed, knowing that they've made a mistake and that they can come to you and you're not going to freak out at them. Like, we're building these things so that when they have their first heartbreak, or when, God forbid, 9/11 happens, we are not presented with a child who has just completely fallen apart because they don't know how to cope.
So coping with something difficult and getting through it, that's what builds resilience.
Absolutely. And having the
Sunny
skills,
innocence.
right, having the skills to be able to do that.
It makes so much sense when you explain it that way. Sara, tell us about Mighty and Bright and where everyone can find it and everything that you do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's at mightyandbright.com. And, the foundation for positive mental health is visual structure, because of the way kids learn. And so it's daily routines, it's a weekly calendar that belongs just to that kid, empowers them, makes them feel a sense of control over their own lives. That also, by the way, helps with their behavior because there's less power struggles. It's pretty amazing. And then there's a whole host of tools that you can get to teach these things to your kids, to really like introduce emotions in a science-based way so that they can process them. And you can also find me on TikTok and Instagram at Mighty and Bright Co, where I talk about this stuff all the time because I love it.
Fantastic. We will link to everywhere you can find Sara. And thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sara.